Hello, I'm Miles Steele, and I'm here with my second video presentation for Art History 347. This one is going to be over Professor Y.K. Lam's article, Vietnamese Celadons and Their Relationship to Southern Chinese Celadons. Professor Peter Y.K. Lam is a professor of Chinese studies from the University of Hong Kong, and most of his publications seem to concern ceramics. He used to be associated with the Art Museum at the University of Hong Kong, and he was the director there for 14 years, but he's since retired in 2013, although he still holds some lectures, and I'll see if I can include a link to an upcoming online lecture he's holding later this year on Chinese ceramics and archaeological sites. So the main argument that Professor Lam puts forth here is that in modern scholarship, there are two camps when it comes to Vietnamese ceramics. The first is a nationalistic approach that minimizes all elements of Chinese influence in Vietnamese history. And the second is a diffusionist approach that considers Vietnam to be a poor backwater province of Greater China. Lam argues that both of these approaches are biased and dishonest. Vietnamese artisans were creative in their own right, and although they are heavily influenced by Chinese ceramics, they did so willingly and injected their own techniques and their own designs into what they learned from China to make uniquely Vietnamese ceramics. Professor Lam argues his point through a comparative analysis of Vietnamese and Chinese celadons, grouped by common decor, color, and shape. He concludes the article with a small section on chronology and dating of Vietnamese celadons. Generally, the article is well organized, but on occasion the sections appear in a weird order and don't flow very well, so I've changed the order of some of the sections in this presentation to help fix that little problem. Before we get into it though, there's a few terms I do want to define that'll be a big help later on. The first is Doosan. They're large covered storage jars with handles and rounded bodies. Garuda, who is the avian mount of Vishnu in Hinduism. Makara is also another figure from Hinduism, a legendary sea creature, and it is the Hindu name for the Capricorn constellation. Qingbai are blue-green Song and Yuan dynasty Chinese celadon, and Longquan are Chinese celadons produced from 950 to 1550. So in the first section, Lam starts off by naming the Li and the Tran dynasties of Vietnam from 1009 to 1400 AD as the time frame for the article, and the pieces analyzed within it, before moving on to some of the characteristics of Vietnamese celadons that can help us separate them from Chinese celadons. The first thing that took place, or the first thing to look out for, is the color. Vietnamese celadons have a lot of variation in the color of their glaze. He points out that they have a smooth and levigated white paste, and earlier glazes tend to have a yellowish or olive green tint due to imperfect control of the firing atmosphere, creating only a partial reduction environment, which oxidizes the glazes and causes them to take on this sort of sepia. Abnormal amounts of iron in early Vietnamese glazes also produce pieces that had a pale green or brown color. Another glaze to look out for is an apple green celadon color that appears in later pieces due to the presence of titanium dioxide. But unlike the earlier yellowish and olive green, the later apple green glaze was produced on purpose. And then there is a chocolate brown dressing that appears on the base of some later vessels, usually in conjunction with the apple green glaze. And so it's important to be mindful of that, because it's very much a hallmark of Vietnamese celadons. It's also important to keep in mind that like I said, the chocolate brown on the base and the apple green glaze are only on later pieces. Also, evidence of stack firing can help identify Vietnamese Celadons, particularly biscuit rings on the interior of a piece or 4 to 5 triangular spur marks. Vietnamese Celadons are also very limited in their forms. Most commonly, they're found as bowls with inverted mouths or rims, deep vertical walls, conical bowls, shallow dishes, covered jars, and ewers with animal-shaped spouts and handles. And the decorative techniques employed by Vietnamese artisans include underglaze painting, molding, incising, and carving. So the first category we look at is early Celadons. Now the first pieces here are the Doosan jars. These are large covered jars with a vertical collar and sloping shoulders with 6 handles. They have a unique crackled transparent ash glaze that covers only half the body and stops above their flat base. They're often compared to Tang Dynasty jars from Guangdong, China, and are very similar, but what sets the Doosan jars of Vietnam apart is that they have less rounded bodies and that they always have 6 handles, whereas the Chinese jars will have 4 to 8 handles. While the Chinese Tang Dynasty jars are easily dated thanks to inscriptions, the Vietnamese counterparts are much trickier, which is a theme that you'll see coming up a lot. Still, scholars speculate that Vietnamese Doosan were being produced from around the 9th to the 10th centuries, making them slightly older than the Chinese influencers. Another early type of Vietnamese Celadon that Lam discusses are pieces that resemble Han Dynasty covered funerary jars. They have high, almost vertical walls and a crackled green glaze that stops just above the foot rim. The Vietnamese pieces can be identified by their more upright stature and varied lids, which either had a mushroom knob like the Chinese examples, or no knob at all. More decorative Vietnamese funerary jars also had unique high relief lotus petal designs on the shoulder or the foot. These are still found on the supports of the Chinese pieces, but the Vietnamese artisans incorporated them into the jars themselves. Some more early Vietnamese Celadons discussed are shallow dishes with a straw-colored or pale green glaze. The center of the dishes are unglazed and bear incised floral inscriptions on a punched ground, similar to what is done in gold and silversmithing. The function of these dishes are unknown, but Lam gives a couple theories that they're either cosmetic containers or ink slabs. He supports this theory by mentioning some similar Chinese dishes that are also known to be ink slabs. There are also some early Celadon ewers that have spouts and handles modeled after Garuda and Makara, suggesting some Indian influence alongside the Chinese influence. And this section here, Lam compares carved, combed, and incised Vietnamese pieces with Chinese King Bai ware from Guangdong, Fujian, and Guangxi. The earliest Vietnamese pieces resembling King Bai come in the form of conical bowls with abstract design, resembling the uppercase letter G, carved and combed into the inside. Something to note about these pieces is that they always have a carved foot. Later Vietnamese artisans adapted other designs from Kin Bai ware, such as rosettes with overlapping floral petals. These later adaptations are nearly identical to Kin Bai ware, but they're stack fired rather than upright fired, so they can be easily identified by the spur marks I mentioned earlier. The apple green glaze and chocolate brown base coloration also starts to appear on these imitation King Bai wares. The last type of Celadon in this section is actually a purely Vietnamese invention. This type includes conical bowls, inverted rim bowls, jars, and globular ewers. They have sunken carving decorations with deep strokes that usually take the form of flower petals, leaves, and stems, and they have variable depth, which is unique. Glaze would pool in the sunken carvings and create darker designs on a light background. This is the opposite of what Chinese potters would do, where they carved around the outlines of the designs so that they could create a lighter design on a darker background. These designs are usually carved on the inside of shallow bowls and the outside of deeper or enclosed vessels, although there are some cases of deep bowls with internal carvings, which was likely very difficult. Later, some of these designs are made with molds, which produced less distinct lines. Moving on to the next section, molded designs. There are two types of Chinese ware that influence molded Vietnamese Celadon: Kien Bai again and Northern Celadon. Most molded Celadon in Vietnam are round bowls with a motif of two babies surrounded by floral scrolls, which is interpreted by scholars as a fertility symbol. The floral design in this motif is taken from carved dingware, and another less common design comes from the scroll of Yaozhou, which influenced the molded decor on southern Chinese Celadons, and in turn influenced the molded decor on Vietnamese olive green Celadons. There is also an interesting group of molded Celadons with daisy floral designs and fluted geometric designs. Similar designs appear in China at an earlier date, but in Vietnam they're much more popular and much more care is given to their details. Also, under this category, we see auspicious symbols such as silver ingots, rhinoceros horns, pearls, and coral that are common on molded Vietnamese Celadons. The final category for molded Celadons are dated toward the end of our chronology, or in the 1400s, and they appear alongside similar pieces in China. They have linear scrolling designs with simple linear and beaded outlines, and they lack the high relief seen in earlier pieces. Here we talk a little bit about Long Quan influence. During the Yuan dynasty, large amounts of Long Quan ceramics were shipped to Vietnam, and it's around this time that we also see Vietnam potters adapting Long Quan, and they adapt almost every single type of Long Quan ceramic. Round bowls with exterior lotus petal reliefs, bowls with impressed floral medallions on the center, and brown spotted celadons are all found in Vietnam at this time. Generally, these Vietnamese versions are faithful recreations, but sometimes potters would add complexity or additional elements to the Chinese designs. Finally, Lamb ends his article talking about chronology and dating. When it comes to Vietnamese Celadon, unfortunately, they're incredibly difficult to date. And the only datable piece we have comes from a Japanese tomb dated to 1499. This is mostly due to a lack of research in archaeology, but when looking at decor, you can still put together a tentative chronology for Vietnamese Celadon with a few guidelines. The main period of Vietnamese Celadon was from the 13th to the 14th century. High relief lotus petals and auspicious symbols get an early date. Chocolate brown base indicates a mid or late date. Late pieces usually have biscuit stacking rings rather than spur marks. Apple green glaze, also a later occurrence. Some later pieces have similar decor to blue and white pieces of the same time. And very late pieces are typically crude and poorly made. On a personal note, I really enjoyed this article. It's always very cool to learn about poorly understood and under-researched topics. It has like a sense of mystery and intrigue because there's still so much we don't know. But I think that Professor Lamb has a problem with meandering in this article. It kind of goes all over the place and it's not organized very well. The language is plain, and I really like that. It's super easy to understand. It's very easy to digest, but it's still not an easy read because the topics are just all over the place. And I feel like although he has a very argumentative thesis, there isn't a lot of arguing in the article. It's very much just informative, which feels kind of weird. And that's it. Thank you for watching.